Have you ever heard of Vladimir Shumdenko? I hadn't ever heard of him at all until I bumped into him on YouTube this week. This is him.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, just a moment, please. I'm sorry, terrible, sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
Righto, that's Vladimir Shumdenko. He is a 24-year-old Ukrainian elite powerlifter, but he's a tiny little guy. And so when he's not, powerlifting and weightlifting for a living in competition, he likes to dress up as a cleaner and go into gyms and just prank people. Videos like that go viral because that is a paradox. That is a paradox. A paradox is something that seems untrue or impossible, but is actually true. Because you look at a little guy dressed like a cleaner and you expect him, you know that he's the weakest guy in the whole gym, right? He's not dressed the part, he doesn't have the big bulking muscles. It would seem impossible for a small guy like that with a mop in one hand to lift weights like that. And so your brain tells you that that video can't be true, that there must be some kind of trick in that. Something like that's impossible, right? And that's a paradox. Something that seems untrue or impossible, but is actually true. This is the second episode in a series we're doing called Paradox. And if you missed last week, you can catch up on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You just search for Tide Church and all of our message content is there. And just a welcome to those who are watching us online. There are people, in fact, all over the world who listen and watch and join us online each week. It's our privilege to be able to share the good news of Jesus with you. So we're talking about paradox because Jesus talked a lot about paradoxes. Jesus often said things that appeared to be untrue or impossible, but were actually true. Last week we heard Jesus say, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. That's a paradox. I mean, losing your life is the exact opposite of saving your life, isn't it? If you want to save your life, the very last thing that you want to do is to lose your life. But Jesus is explaining that this is how things work in his world. This is how things work in his kingdom. When people focus on themselves, when people's world becomes about trying to do things for themselves, about getting and keeping things for themselves, not only will people ultimately not save their life, actually in doing that, people will lose their life. Whereas when people give their lives away to Jesus and to others, in the end, he says those people will actually save their lives and live forever. It's a paradox, something that seems to be untrue or impossible, but is actually true. So today we're going to look at another paradox from the mouth of Jesus. But for this one, we're going to have to fast forward 30 years after Jesus to the life of Paul. Paul was a leader in the early church. Paul wasn't one of the original 12 disciples. In fact, as best we know, Paul never met Jesus in his earthly life face to face. We don't know if he actually saw him at all, not up close at least. Paul wasn't one of the original followers of Jesus. In fact, not only was he not one of the original followers of Jesus, Paul grew up hating Christians. In fact, in his spare time, Paul would hunt down Christians, hunt down people in the early church and try and shut the thing down, try and squash the church, because he believed these people were doing the wrong thing by God. He believed these people were leading people astray, and what they were talking about was untrue and needed to be stopped. Paul made it his mission in life to end this Jesus movement. And then one day, Paul had a powerful encounter with Jesus. You can read all about it in Acts chapter 9. Paul has a powerful encounter in Jesus, and in one day he goes from being someone who's trying to end the Jesus movement to being its greatest champion and spokesperson overnight, just like that. And some of us know today that that's just what happens, isn't it, when Jesus gets a hold of people's hearts. Lives just get turned around, perspectives get changed, attitudes and behaviours just get changed like that. Fast forward 20 years or so, Paul is an older man. He's been following Jesus now for a long time. He's travelled all over the world sharing the story of the resurrection and sharing the truth of Jesus with people. He's seen lives get turned around. He's seen miracles happen, right? But while all this stuff is happening around Paul, he's struggling with a personal battle inside himself. Paul has so much to be thankful for on the outside, but inside he's suffering with pain and hurt. And I bet there are people in the room today who know exactly how Paul felt. When people ask how you're doing, you say fine. And you are doing okay. Sort of. You've got lots to be thankful for, of course, we all do. Now, there are so many people who are doing it tougher than you, right? But none of that takes away from the pain and the hurt and the suffering that exists inside of you. We don't know exactly what Paul's pain, his suffering was. Some Bible experts think it was a pain and suffering caused by other people, caused by opponents, people who were chasing him from town to town and attacking him and trying to bring him down. Some people think it was just sort of an emotional pain that came from that kind of opposition in his life, which Paul knew a lot about because he was on the other side for many years, or for some years. Other experts think that Paul's talking about some kind of mistake or sin that he's made. Some people think that Paul just can't leave behind him something that he's done in his former life, and it just continues to chase him and to dog him. And knowing the former life that Paul lived, that's quite possible. That he's living with the reality that he actually sent some people to be executed who probably didn't need to be executed. Lots of people think that Paul lived with some kind of physical pain or disability. Lots of people think that Paul's eyesight was failing, that he was literally going blind, and of course he lived in a time where there was nothing you could do about that. A guy that spent his life teaching and talking and writing, to be going blind is just a horrible thing for Paul. Whatever it is, Paul is praying and has been praying consistently that God would change his circumstances, that God would heal him. But nothing's happening for Paul. Listen to what he writes in his letter to the Corinthian church. This is, we're going to be reading today from 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So if you've got a Bible, go there. If you're on your phone, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, there's Bibles at the back of the room that you're always welcome to grab. And of course, as we always say, the YouVersion app, the YouVersion Bible app is completely free, and you can have the whole Bible searchable right on your phone. So, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, you've got the boys' names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then you've got a big book of Acts, a big book of Romans, and then two books, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. We're in the second one in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I'm going to start reading from verse 8. Paul is writing about this pain in his life, and he says this: 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Therefore I will boast, this is Paul saying now, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. That's why, for the sake of Christ, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul has been repeatedly praying for God to do something. And when Jesus sort of finally speaks to Paul, and we don't know exactly how that happened. Was this a dream or a vision or some sort of audible voice, or did God speak through someone else into his life? We don't know, but Paul heard the words of Jesus spoken into his life, and Jesus says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness." Effectively, Jesus is saying, and we don't like to hear this, but Jesus is saying to Paul, you don't need to be healed. You don't need to be healed because you've got my grace in your life, and that's enough. What more do you want when you've got my grace is sufficient. My grace is enough for you. My power is perfected in weakness, Jesus says. My power is shown best in weakness. Now that's a paradox, because we know that's not true, is it? I mean, that seems to be impossible, isn't it? Power is demonstrated in healing. Power is demonstrated in strength. Power is demonstrated in victory. Power is demonstrated in success. And yet Jesus says the ultimate demonstration of my power is in weakness. And Paul responds by saying, it's a rhetorical conversation Paul's having with the Corinthians, and he responds by saying, that's why for the sake of Christ I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul's saying, that's why, understanding that now that his grace is sufficient for me, that's why I'm now delighted about the things that aren't going well in my life. I'm actually excited about the hardships I'm facing. I'm excited about my weakness. I'm excited about the insults that are coming my way. I'm excited about the difficulties that are coming my way. I'm excited when things don't go well, because when I am weak in myself, then I can be strong in Jesus. It's a paradox. Something that seems to be untrue, something that seems to be impossible, but is in fact true. So this morning we're going to get personal and ask, what does this mean for us? That's fine for Paul 2,000 years ago, but what does this mean for us today? Because just like Paul, we live in a world that sees strength in healing and in victory and in power and success, don't we? I mean, that's why a tiny power lifter dressed as a cleaner lifting weight, that's why that blows our minds, doesn't it? Because that's not our picture of power. That's the very picture of weakness, isn't it? You walk into a gym and you see a little guy in overalls with a mop. He is not the picture of power in the gym, is he? He's the picture of weakness. That's the way our minds work. We're trained to think that our goal in life, that the goal for all of us in life is to be strong and independent, right? I don't need anyone. You don't need anything. We've got this. And Jesus comes along and says, there's another way to live. Actually, there's a better way to live. He says, because when you're weak, then you can't do it on your own. And when you can't do it on your own, that's when you're ready to come to Jesus and to ask him for help. As long as you think that you've got the muscles to lift the weight on your own, you're never going to ask for help, right? It's our weakness that helps us trust God. It's in our lack, it's in our inability that forces us to lean on Jesus and to look to him to provide for us what we need. when I'm weak in myself, then I can rest my life on the strength of Jesus. When I give up trying to do things on my own, then I'm ready to look to Jesus and to say, I'm trusting you. Because only then I know I can't do it on my own. That's why Paul is so excited when everything's against him, because he knows that that's when he's got space in his life to best trust God. It's a paradox. My weakness leads to my greatest strength. Your weakness has the potential to lead to your greatest strength. So the question to ask yourself today, and we're going to ask this when we get together in groups, is, are you ready to embrace your weakness and the things that go wrong in your life? Are you ready to embrace those things and allow Jesus to be your strength in those moments? Because that's what happened to Paul. That's what he's writing to the Corinthians, saying, I've discovered this and I want to share this with you. You've got to ask yourself, do you really believe Jesus when he says, my grace is sufficient for you? Is that just Bible talk, or do you really believe that in your life? Do you really believe him when he says, my power is perfected in weakness? Do you really believe that Jesus is enough for you? That's the question we're going to talk about today. Because the truth is that we can all sit here, confident and bold, like we've got this. Like we know what we're doing. It's so easy in our world, isn't it, to look at other people who don't have it all together and just to shake our heads at them. If only they did this, they'd be all right. You know that? If only they'd just understand that. If only they'd just do things the way I do things. If only they'd understand the things that I do, then their life would work out. We can live like that, or we can live a life that admits that actually we don't have it all together either. We can admit that deep down we're weak and we're hopeless too. We're really no better than those people that we want to shake our heads at. You know what I'm saying? That's the point where we can smile in our weakness and our troubles and our difficulties, and we can say, now I'm ready to be strong in Jesus. At the point that I drop the sense that I've got this, at the point that I admit that I can't do this on my own, that's the point where I'm ready to say, I can now trust in God and be strong in Jesus. And that's a choice that, like Paul, we all get to make. We're going to ask each other how we see strength in weakness. I mean, do we see the goal of life to be strong, to be successful, to be victorious? Do we see weakness as something to be avoided? Don't want that in my life, don't want to be like that. Or do we see weakness as an opportunity to trust God, to sort of lean in to Jesus and to rest on him? Do we see trouble and suffering as an opportunity to give up our own strength and find real, true, lasting strength in Jesus? Because when you think about the difficult and the painful and the hurtful things in your life, and if we're honest, we all have something in our life that is difficult and painful and hurtful. If you don't talk to me afterwards, I'd love to know the secret, but you know what I'm saying. We all have that thing somewhere in our lives. Can we live like Paul in those moments and say, I delight in weakness? I delight in insults and in persecutions and in suffering and in hardships and in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. I'm sort of strangely delighted. I'm strangely happy about the things that aren't going well in my life. Because only when I'm weak in myself can I truly experience the strength of Jesus in my life. It's a paradox. And we're going to ask one another today, are we ready to embrace that paradox in our lives? Because I want to be as honest as we can to say today and say, this isn't just a mental exercise, is it? As in, this isn't just something you kind of talk about in church, and it's interesting because some of us have actual real problems in our life, right? You know, outside of Sunday morning. Some of us have got physical and health challenges that just won't go away. Some of us have got stuff happening at school and at uni and at work, situations that are just tough. Not like one day tough or 1 week tough, but just tough all the time for us. Some of us have mental ill health. Maybe in a way that everyone knows about, but maybe something that's just that just sits quietly humming along in the back of our life, and it's a constant challenge for us. Some of us have relationship problems, financial problems, you know, the list goes on. But these are real problems, not Sunday morning problems, real out there life problems. So when we say that this paradox asks us questions, this asks us real questions about how we live today, about how you get up tomorrow, about how you're going to live this week. For some of us, these questions could affect the rest of our lives, literally. Are you ready to hear Jesus say, are you ready to accept Jesus saying, my grace is sufficient for you and my power is made perfect in your weakness? And like Paul, are you ready to respond to that by saying, I delight in my weaknesses? Insults, persecutions, hardships, troubles, whatever it is. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Because your answer to that paradox could change your life forever.